All right, so welcome back. Here we are, and we're going to go ahead and look at some notes on Immanuel Kant today, which I know is very exciting to you. It's very exciting to me as well. All right, so let's begin by looking at some of the buildup. As we can see, that we are in the period of German idealism. We're in the period of the Enlightenment, as the case may be. Europe is coming out of the Dark Ages, as you may remember from your Western Civ classes. And they have received quite a bit of information, which you probably recall from your Eastern Civ classes, about some of the philosophical traditions that have gone on before. So there's all sorts of traditions of people talking about utopia and getting back to the Greek-Roman ideal. There's Spinoza, who believes that the universe is made up of these mathematical equations, that we're all just kind of waiting and hoping and praying to discover, as the case may be. And there's Hobbes, who comes in and gives us this idea of atheism and materialism, the existence of nothingness. So we are just atoms in the voids. George Berkeley, actually a bishop, is going to talk quite a bit about this. We'll get into that in just a moment. John Locke, Bacon, all of these people, what is important about this? What's important about this is that these folks are in communication with one another. And Immanuel Kant, I mentioned it in the introduction to this, but Immanuel Kant is not, I repeat, is not this impossible philosopher to understand. He is a brilliant man, much like Plato, as well as Aristotle. I would say that in terms of full philosophical, meatiness, that he's one of your top guys of all time, without a doubt, right up there with Plato. But he's in conversation with this, and this is happening because it's in the Enlightenment. It's in the Enlightenment. Europe is coming out of the Dark Ages. We have all of this philosophy available to us, and he is the person who is able to kind of match it together. So that's pretty impressive. So you have a guy like George Berkeley who just kind of gives up, and you can see him in his little picture here that he is more or less, and this is on slide 6, he's more or less believes that everybody exists in order to kind of reenact the play within his head, if you will. So everybody is here for the specific and inherent reason of pleasing him. Nothing exists outside of his mind. That is to say that nothing exists outside of his 5 senses. His, ability to see, to touch, to do all of those types of things. This is in stark contrast to Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, not the tiger, who believes that material things are those that exist regardless of what our perception of them is. So Hobbes is a believer that there are things out there that are yet to be discovered, that have yet to be invented, and that's important for us to understand. Excuse me, I've been a little sick lately. So all of this brings us into Immanuel Kant. Why is this important? It's important only to see that this is a man who has a lot of ideas spinning out around him. He's heavily influenced by his parents, who are very, very pious Christians, living in the edge of Prussia. He is right there in smack dab in the middle of the European Enlightenment, which is going to kind of shape his thought process, and he's going to see a lot of different people who are around him. But we don't need to know as much about him and his biography as we do need to know about Karl Marx, for instance. Even though they're from similar areas and from even a similar time frame, but Marx and the bigotry that he really experienced as a Jew growing up in Prussia is not going to be the case with Kant. Kant is one of those rare individuals, much like Plato, again, I'll make the same comparison, who kind of transcends his biography. Kant's ideas would have been just as relevant and as important to us today as they would have been in 1740 when he first started to develop them, as they would have been in 1300 had he developed them then, as they would have been in 4 BC if he had developed them right next to Plato. So there's not too much that we need to know about him. Although, I mean, the interplay between the science and the Christianity and the religion thing is important to him because he is growing up in a time period where, you know, the scientific method is becoming all the rage. We're starting to make chemical discoveries or chemistry discoveries. So he believes in methods for things. He believes that it is important for us to develop proper methods in order to do things, if you will. So therefore, for him, and here we are, we're on number 10, for Kant, it all starts with pure, unadulterated reason. And this is where we get the name of his first book, The Critique of Pure Reason. It's the means by which we examine our motives and understandings of the human conditions. We understand the limitations of the human mind based on this exploration. So he develops a system of a scientific method, if you will, that we can develop in order to define what we can and cannot know. I mean, it's very simple in this idea. This is, as you know, we give vocabulary to the types of things that we use. This is his epistemology, all right? Kant believes that there are things that we can understand and that there are things that we do not understand, but they are still an important part of our lives. So, for instance, I know that I need to do laundry today because I do not have a lot of clean clothing left. I know that if I put my hand on a hot stove that it will be burned. This is sensory experience, and this is analytical experience, all right? I cannot tell by my senses that my clothes are dirty unless I smell them, and they smell particularly putrid. But I do know that based on the human condition, that if I take Kevin, who has not, you know, showered or been cleaned in quite some time in a day, and he wears clothing all day, the clothing may not smell so bad because if you recall, you know, human beings have lived for thousands upon thousands of years without doing laundry as often as we do. But I know that based on my social norms and all the different information that I put in front of me, that that it's dirty. I'm supposed to wash it. And therefore we get some kind of a mathematical type of information. All right, so Kant proposes, and I think we'll start calling him Manny at this point. Manny proposes 3 basic types of human knowledge, and I think that this is pretty impressive for him at the time. Excuse me. First of all, the majority of our knowledge that we know, learn, and experience is empirical. Here we are, we're on slide 11. That means that the majority of the knowledge that we understand comes from our 5 senses. We know things based on how we experience them. All right. So I know what a tree is because I've seen the tree. I've seen them in books. I've felt them. I've seen what they do and how they react, etc., etc., etc. That is how I know what a tree is. I cannot come up with a mathematical equation that will use imaginary numbers in the quadratic formula in order for me to arrive at my understanding of what a tree is. However, I can create analytical statements when I have formulas in different systems that I can hypothesize what results are based on other types of findings. So, you know, this is what the scientific method is based on. If I, burn a tissue and I see how quickly it lights on fire, if I have a similar piece of paper, or if I have another piece of paper, I can be fairly certain that it too will burn. I would never pick up a tissue and a paper towel, and even though the consistency of the two is different, say that, well, it would be impossible for me to believe that the paper towel will also burn. This must be something that is not a flammable object. That's foolish. This is absolutely foolish. I give you the example here that I am terrified of flying. I've never experienced a plane crash, and yet I am afraid of flying. I am afraid of flying because I know that even though it is highly unlikely for the plane to crash, that if it does, I have a very, very low possibility of surviving the plane crash based on verifiable data of plane crashes. So when we see a plane crash, it's very rare that we have a gentleman, a pilot like Sullenberger there, who's able to land the plane on the Hudson River, and everybody's able to escape gracefully and peacefully. More likely to happen is if the plane is going down, nobody's gonna make it out. So that is a kind of system or type of knowledge, analytical knowledge, that I can derive at based on the system that I've created, based on a mathematical proposition, more or less. The last one, number 3, and here we are on slide number 12, is a little bit more difficult. This is synthetic a priori knowledge. All right, and Kant proposes that we know things, we intuit things that does not have any kind of basis in our sensory experience or our scientific knowledge, our hypothetical knowledge of systems. This becomes difficult to understand. We have to play with this a little bit, because if the knowledge is not based on any of our 5 senses, which is the way that we experience the material world, all right, so I cannot experience the material world if I cannot see the material world. Although I may be able to use the 4 other senses that I have. If I don't have any of those senses, I can't move, talk, smell, etc., 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 see, then my life is drastically different from yours if you have the ability to do all of those things. Even if somebody is, say, colorblind, they experience the world in a very, very different way than you do if you are not colorblind. When we take that away, so we say that a priori, synthetic a priori knowledge is knowledge that has nothing to do with sensory experience. That eliminates 95% of the way that we know things. If we take that and then we also exclude all of our scientific method and our mathematical equations, our logical deductions, because that's basically what he's talking about when he talks about analytical knowledge. He's talking about logical deductions, okay? So I know if A, then B. I know that if I put my hand through a plate glass window, that I will probably cut my hand. I don't need to do that in order for it to happen. I know that because I know that glass is breakable, and I know that my hand is not, made of steel. All right? And these sound like silly ideas, but these sound like silly examples, but they help to prove the point. So the synthetic a priori knowledge, is knowledge that is apart from all of those other things. We just know it. That is difficult for us to understand. So there's a nice little cartoon here on slide number 13 for you to take in. I don't think that math is a science. I think that it's a religion. We're supposed to take all these equations like miracles and add 2 numbers, and they magically become one new number. Nobody can say how it happens. You either believe it or you don't. Well, Calvin, as we all know, this is not the case, because we can take numbers like 2 plus 2, and I can take 2 markers, and you can give me 2 markers, and we can know just based on the number on our fingers that we have on our hand that we now collectively have 4 markers. That's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. And because that mathematical system works, others do as well. All right. We're on to 14 now. So if we understand that information is possible outside of our own experience, our own systems, our own methods, then we must be able to comprehend a different type of plane of existence outside of our sensory experience and outside of our systems of scientific discovery and logical deduction. All right? So, let's take this to the next extreme. What do we need if we are going to move outside of our sensory experience? Well, our sensory experience is trapped, much like every animal. Every animal in the world has sensory experience. Okay? So if you have a dog, the dog can see and smell and feel and move and hear, etc., etc., etc. So the dog learns things. Your dog Scruffy knows that if it poops on your homework, that you're not going to be happy with it, and it knows that if it comes and nuzzles up to you when you're having a bad day, that you are going to be happy with the dog, and the dog is going to be conditioned to do what you want it to do. That is that we understand these things based on our position in time and in space. Okay, so your dog can only learn based on its sensory experience in a certain time in a certain space. If your dog or your gerbil or your goldfish or whatever lived in a different time with a different set of circumstances, its sensory experience might be completely different. And we human beings are the same exact way. We're on 15 now. We are completely held hostage to really our own time and our own place, our own. So if I was born, and I mean this is not controversial. These are not controversial things that I'm saying. These are things that you know and understand. We are in Fairfield County. If I was born in Bangladesh, if I was born in Iceland on May 14th, 1982, just in the same way that I was born here in Fairfield on May 14th, 1982, I would have a very different sensory experience. And all of that has to do with where I'm brought up. Even if we take everything else out of the equation. All right, so I have the same parents, they have the same social status, we have the same race, etc., etc., etc. Just by virtue of being in a different geographic place, I would have a different experience. Same thing if I was born, instead of on May 14th, 1982, if I was born on May 14th, 1892. I would have, even if I was born in Fairfield, even if I was born to the parents of the same social status, of the same race, etc., 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 I would have a very, very different sensory experience. These are things that we know and we understand. So, in order for us to have synthetic a priori knowledge, we have to remove ourselves from that. Because it needs to be knowledge that is true no matter what. It needs to be knowledge that is true no matter what time, place, geography, human population, etc. All right? It must be knowledge that we can never arrive at through deductive reasoning. All right? So what's the type of knowledge that we're talking about here? We're talking about things like intuition, emotion, desire, dreams, hopes, excuse me, etc., etc., etc. These are things that cannot be understood based on systems of deductive reasoning and or systems of sensory understanding. And if we can agree that these types of things exist, then we can move forward. So if you know something is wrong, and you cannot say that it's wrong based on your previous experience and or your proposed, deductive reasoning based on your future experience, then it must exist. So, because we're just coming out of the holiday season, I take the holiday season as an example of this, all right? There is nothing that says to us that December, the winter solstice, is supposed to be a special time of year. But it seems to be throughout all cultures and people, etc. And if you look at it, we have all these different religious traditions that kind of coincide with the season. I mean, we're pretty close to Ramadan. There's Hanukkah, there's Kwanzaa, there's Christmas, there's the solstice from the pagan traditions going all the way back. All of these kinds of winter celebrations are meant to, celebrate the end of winter, more or less, and the coming of the light. The solstice is the coming of the light, and now things are going to start getting better. So it has a real sense of renewal, and I think that you will have this experience of having, good feelings around this time, unless you have a sensory experience that overpowers that intuition. So for instance, if you had a family member who was close to you pass away during this time period, if sensory experiences that really kind of can defeat that intuitive knowledge. I hope this makes sense to you, because this is why it would be difficult to explain Kant, because he depends on intuition. All right, so here we are in 16. It sounds like Plato. Well, yes, it does. It does sound like Plato. Plato did not believe that we could reach the realm of the forms, but that we would continue to keep trying. And Plato believed that the forms probably existed. We're off and on about whether or not the realm of the forms is real. Kant, on the other hand, as you can see, defines our own world as a phenomenal world. All right, so then as you can see here on 16, pheno in Greek means appearances, or literally come to light. So he's referring to the world as we understand it. The phenomenal world is not in the way that you would understand the phenomenal as being something that is extraordinary, but this is truly ordinary. All right, and that could be a point of confusion. And he also postulates the nominal world from the Greek, which is perceived, or that which we understand, think of, imagine. All right, this nominal world is the place that we cannot reach. We can never reach it. That's the big point between Plato and Kant. That's a point of contention. And here we are now on 17. All right. So is this kind of like a Matrix-like reality? Are we talking about the fact that we live in a fake world, but a real world exists somewhere out there? Much like Berkeley would say that I live inside my mind, but that's not the sum of the human existence. No. What we need to understand is that if the nominal world is a place where we are inspired, it's better to think of it as if you were an artist and you were to find a muse, if you will. All right, so a person or a thing or a place that inspires you and helps you to creatively kind of accomplish your tasks. That's what the nominal world was meant to be. It's something that's an inspiration, if you will. And therefore, it's not a place like heaven. It's not a realm like the forms. It's not somewhere we can go, because it's the opposite of everything that we understand. So we live in a physical world that's ruled by time and space and understanding. The nominal world is the opposite of all of that. It's a place, or it's not even a place. It's an understanding, a realm, whatever you want to call it, where there is no such thing as time, there is no such thing as space, and there is no such thing as reason. But yet truth exists there, because the truth kind of pokes through and makes us understand what is right and what is wrong. Okay? We're going to stop right here. We're on 18. I'm going to take a little break, because we've been going at it for about 25 minutes now. And we'll be right back. All right, so grab yourself a cupcake or a nice little drink, and we'll see you in a minute. All right, welcome back. Thank you for putting up the little break. We're getting a little tuckered out there. So here we are on slide number 18. My boy Zach Morris is hanging out there. A little timeout. So the big question becomes, if the world that Kant has envisioned, if you recall, we were dealing with the nominal world and we were dealing with the phenomenal world. All right. So the big question becomes is, well, there's a couple of good questions, but first and foremost, one of the problems that's waged against Kant is the idea that, well, how can we really know that we're any different than animals? Your nominal world assumes that we as human beings are somehow better, and yet we have all of these needs. And Kant said, well, yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. Human beings have sensibilities that they need to take care of. If I don't eat, if I do not drink water, fluids, if I do not relieve myself, if I attempt to stop breathing, all right, there's very serious physical, material needs that I need to take care of in my life. So that's true. There is sensibility, but human beings, he would say, and I think I would tend to agree, and I think that you should as well. We have the extra added ability to understand things. All right, we can organize data and we can do something with it. All right. You know, the dogs have been around for about as long as we have. Fish, we all descended, evolved from the fish, and yet they have not done a lot with the information that they've developed over millions upon millions of years. That therefore that kind of speaks to the idea that we have the capacity to organize data. We have a consciousness. We have the capacity to organize data and do something with it. What's interesting about this, as you can see here at the bottom of 18, is that when we look at human development, we become cognizant of technology and the development that future human beings will have. All right, so not only can we see the past, we can organize data from the past and then understandably learn from it. If you recall Marx, that's the idea of, and Hegel, that's the idea of conflict history, that we become better as a society over time. We can faithfully, and we have to live in the present. We have to live in the present where we are. That's what we're stuck in. But we can envision a future, period. We can envision a time that is not now, when we will not exist, when presumably things will be better. People who can do this, we consider to be visionaries. People who can invent something like an iPod or a things like that. And that's why it's so funny when we look back at Jetsons or different kind of 50s movies. We had this idea of flying cars because we had planes and we had automobiles. So you put the two together. I can't imagine that we are... Well, I mean, you know what? I can't say that I can't imagine, but it's difficult for me to imagine flying cars. But I know that when I was born and when I was growing up that I could not imagine the internet. I know that when I was born and I was growing up, I could not picture an iPod or an Amazon Kindle, these types of things that are futuristic and are in our midst. It's interesting how technology exists when we are ready for it. And Kant has a response for this as we move on to 19. He says, that's the difference between things. Things exist in and of itself. Things have a nature that we don't necessarily tap into. We can never understand the fullness of any object or any person or anything for that matter. So this is the ding and such, or the thing in and of itself. So if we take clowns for an example, here we have some examples of some pretty freaky deaky clowns. On the far right, there is the It clown from Stephen King's It. In the middle, there's our little friend, I don't remember his name, but he's from Saw, the Saw series. And then on the left, there's one of our killer clowns from outer space. When I was a small child, my brother sat me down and made me watch Stephen King's It. And clowns are pretty scary. And they scared me for quite some time. Now, what's interesting about this is that we've seen it in so many different aspects of our popular culture. So it must exist because there are so many different instances of these scary, creepy, deepy clowns around. And yet, if we move on to 20, nobody would say that that's the purpose of a clown. You know, the clown is not meant to be a scary thing. But somewhere along the lines, you know, some folks who maybe saw things a little bit differently, you know, again, maybe visionaries or creative types or artists, saw this as something to turn on its head. So we take the clown. The clown is a character that is meant to be mirthful and bring joy to children, and let's make it really scary, because what's worse than, you know, the most intimate and natural of things that bring joy to small children? What's worse than that attacking you as a child? You know, the things that you trust, clowns and teddy bears and things like that, things that are supposed to bring you enjoyment. So that is a part of the thing in and of itself. Now, you probably are sitting there thinking that I'm going crazy at this point, but if it manifests itself in the outside world, then it has to exist in the nominal world. So clowns cannot just be pure, happy-go-lucky, friendly little creatures. They have to, within their nature, they have to be able to, you know, have that little evil streak in them, if you will. So there are understandings of the clown that encompass everything that you think of clowns, as well as everything that I think of clowns, as well as everything that your parents think of clowns, etc., etc., etc. It's a, you know, in clowndom, in the nature of the clown, it's a big enough tent for all of us to get along in. And it is that because the nature in the nominal world is big enough to support all of it. All right. So as we move on to 21, we got a little all dogs go to heaven. Kant was controversial in his time period because he did not necessarily envision a religious system in the way that it was. He did not envision Christianity in the way that it was. He thought that instead of all the rituals and the miracles and stuff like that, that we should and could, and it's appropriate to use religion to help people morally and ethically make the right decision. So therefore, religion should be focused on the following things: we focus on the community, and we focus on the idea that human beings have free will. He agreed with that. Human beings have the capacity to make right and wrong decisions, and that they discover what those right and wrong decisions are through trial and error. So, you know, and this is going to get confusing in a minute because it's not just trial and error. It's more than just trial and error, but one of the most fundamental ways that we understand what we do and don't do is through that idea of trial and error. So, for instance, you know, I talk often about my 4-year-old nephew Matthew, and my 4-year-old nephew Matthew likes to inflict pain on other people. And he does not have the capacity yet to understand that he is doing it. He thinks it's funny to see people in pain because he's a kid, you know. But eventually what will happen through a process of trial and error is that he will recognize that when he hits his brother hits him back. And it's kind of a reverse golden rule, so that when his brother Sean hits him back, or his brother Finn, who is, you know, 6 years older than he is, hits him back, it hurts. And that it might not be a good policy to hit people through trial and error, you know? And that's, as you are developing as a young person, that's important. Move on to 22. So, in summary, what do we know? Yes, we do have sensible, as we say, human animalistic needs. We need to sleep, eat, drink, relieve ourselves, etc., etc. As Berkeley put it, these are the material entities that we have. If we don't do these things, we will expire, we will die. But, and this is undeniable, you can see a picture of my sister-in-law up here in the corner. This is Maureen and her identical twin sister, Michelle. We also have beliefs, hopes, dreams, desires, emotions, and fears. These are not simply rational and physically explainable entities. All right? You can't get much closer in two human beings than twins, identical twins. And yet, as any of you who have met identical twins know how different they can be in personality and dreams and ideas and hopes and lifestyle activities, etc., etc., etc. All right? So, 23. So seriously, how should we act? Well, what we're seeing here is that we're living in flux between how we should act and how we do act. All right? And this is what's very interesting, because he comes up with not only a hypothetical imperative, but also a categorical imperative. And this is very, very similar to Pedro Arrupe's man for others kind of idea. All right? A hypothetical imperative is more or less selfishly driven. So I know that if I don't want people to, Matthew knows that if he doesn't want his brother Sean or his brother Finn to punch him in the face, that he should not punch them in the face. All right? I know that if I want people to treat me with respect, that I should treat them with respect. And to tell a very brief story, when I went to St. Joseph's University down in Philadelphia, and I wish you could see me right now because I'm flapping up a storm here on December 27th. But there was a young man I used to play rugby with, and we all had nicknames. My nickname was Smiley. And this young gentleman's name was Dingleberry. And the reason why his nickname was Dingleberry was because at the beginning of the year meeting, they took attendance, and obviously this is the first time that I had ever played for the team, so there was a spot for a name, phone number, address, and nickname. Obviously, I was not on the team before, so I did not yet have a nickname. So I left that space blank. This young man, and I could, for the life of me, could not tell you what his real name is, but he wrote down Maverick in the nickname spot. He was quite the Top Gun fan, as I recall. So our president at the time was a gentleman named Ronnie. He had never gotten a nickname. He's just Ronnie. Came up and said, well, Maverick, who the heck is Maverick? And this little freshman kind of sheepishly held up his hand, and he goes, Maverick, forget that. Your name's Dingleberry from now on. So, we follow rule. What's it all mean? Yeah, I'll leave some time for you to laugh it up, have a good time. What does this all mean? We leave some time for rules. We leave some time for the way that we treat other people. We adhere to customs. I would not go to the Middle East and to the Arabian Peninsula and wipe my bottom with the Quran, because I know that the Quran is a sacred book to Muslims, and I know that that would be like a Muslim wiping his behind with the Eucharist to me. So we adhere to customs. Where are we? Oh, here we are in 24. Categorical imperative comes from the nominal realm. All right, so it all fits back together. Again, the nominal is not something that we understand. It's not something that we can deal. It's the opposite of everything that we know. So if the hypothetical is best expressed in the golden rule, and therefore if I do this, then I can expect this. If I am nice to somebody else, I can expect that they should be nice to me. But we know that the world doesn't always work like that. We know that occasionally, in a perfect world, everybody would play nice and everybody would share their toys and their blocks and et cetera, et cetera. And there would be no need for us to say things like, well, there are often times that I am nice to somebody else and they are not nice to me. So the categorical imperative steps in where the hypothetical imperative drops off. The categorical imperative is Kant's major contribution, and it's the idea that we ought to do something based on our intuitions, our emotions, our hopes, our desires, and our dreams, not simply because of what we get. All right, so this is where Kant is called a deontologist, and I asked you guys to watch a little short video clip about deontology that would help to explain what this means. Deontology is a ethical tradition that states that they're not concerned about the result of your actions. All right, so for instance, there's a guy named John Stuart Mill who talks about utilitarianism, which might be something that's familiar to you. And in utilitarian thought, you always make the decision that benefits the most amount of people, regardless of what it does to others. All right, so if you can save 99 people by killing one, then you would make the best moral decision by killing that one person. Kant does not believe in that. He believes that with a categorical imperative, that we need to have a couple different ideas as to how society can be perfective. All right, so let's go into the first maxim. And this is, as I tried to mention before, deontology is therefore a system of ethical beliefs that is not concerned with the outcome. It has instead its own tradition, it has instead its own set of rules, regardless of how the other person asks. So in that sense, you are, as he would call you, your own moral agent, and you cannot be swayed by other people's actions. All right, so let's go on to relationships with women, and therefore can actually be in relationships with them that's not, overly sexualized or only looking for one thing. All right, so I give you an example. I know it's fun to drink 29 beers. It's not fun to drink 29 beers and nearly die. That's sarcastic. But if I do this every weekend, it's probably not the best life choice. I think these are things that we know. So we understand that there are short-term pleasures. There are things that we want to do now. It feels good to eat the candy bar. It feels good to do those things. But we also know that if we do those things all the time, so if I drink alcohol all the time, I know that I'm not going to be able to accomplish my goals in life. And ultimately, that's what's really fun. All right. Number 30, unsocial sociability. So we're fighting against our natural inclinations to be selfish and horrible because we know deep down that it's not the best thing for us. We know from that nominal world. Kant really believed that human nature was evil. He thought that if left unchecked, that we would be selfish and make bad decisions. But the paradox is that we had to be in community in order to survive. So if we had to be in community, then we might as well make decisions that were good for us and for all of us. So, last but not least, Kant in a nutshell. His entire ideology can be summed up in 3 questions. So what can I know? All right, if you can answer that, then you have 90% of Kant down. What can I know? I can know that there are 3 different types of knowledge. Okay, there's empirical knowledge, there's analytical knowledge, and there is synthetic a priori knowledge. All right, you can go back and check out what all that's about from before. What ought I to do? What should I do? Well, I know that there are hypothetical imperatives that I should do just to be a rational and reasonable adult. There are things that I should do. All right, I know that in order to fulfill my rational self-interest, that I should delay some of my pleasure to the long term rather than just take it all for the short term. Now, not all short-term pleasure is bad, but you just can't have it, if you will, all the time. In order to accomplish your goals, you need to delay some of your short-term happiness and allow it to become long-term happiness. All right? And then there's also this categorical imperative. What ought I to do? Well, if I could tap into my intuition, my hopes, my dreams, my belief that humanity can one day be better, then I know that I can never treat other people as I can never use other people. I can never imagine another person close to me acting in the same way that I am. You know, if I'm going to do something bad, if you will, if I'm going to shoot heroin, I wouldn't want my older brother, who 5 years ago was in a set of very similar circumstances as I am, when he was 28, I wouldn't have want to have thought of him shooting heroin. So I won't do it because that person's close to me. And last but not least, the hardest thing to do is to say, well, if I don't want to believe that my brother would do that, then I shouldn't be prepared to believe that anybody should do that. That's the universal aspect of it. And so last but not least is the idea of what can I expect. So if I do what I ought to do, then what can I expect? Well, this is the part that's the hardest to pin down. If I do what I ought to do, then I should expect to live in a society that is better, because I am an acting moral agent and I'm doing the best that I can. If I'm doing the best that I can, then I can't force anybody else to do the best that they can, but the only thing I can expect is that society will eventually improve based on my example. That's it. So anywho, this has been one heck of a way for me to spend a Monday night. I hope that this is helpful to you. If it's not, then, well, go ahead and never ever do it again. But yeah, just a little bit over 60 minutes. Just a little bit over a 60-minute lecture. It's a lot. So, but that's Kant. It's Kant in a nutshell, baby.